Hello and welcome back to Autistic After Hours. I'm your host Ashra, and today I wanted to talk about my sensory issues and the very real experience of becoming physically ill from your sensory difficulties. Before we get into the episode, quick reminder to follow Autistic After Hours on Instagram. I post original content on there every single week and your support helps me out a lot. Also, a reminder to please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now, whether that is on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. It makes a huge difference when you actually follow or subscribe. The reason why I wanted to talk about this today is because I don't think enough people are aware of the fact that your sensory issues can literally physically disable you. I know that for myself, people in my life, I think, don't understand why or how or the severity to which this can happen. And so I wanted to make this episode today to talk about my experiences and in the process maybe validate some of your experiences, and also as a tool for some of you to be able to use to help you explain your sensory issues if that's helpful, or to share with people in your life to help them better understand how your sensory issues impact you. I do also want to say that if you do not feel impacted by your sensory issues in this way, or to this severity, if you do not become physically ill from your sensory issues, that does not mean that you don't experience them. It does not mean that you are not valid. It is totally okay if you do not relate to this, but this episode is just my experiences, and hopefully if you do relate, hopefully it's validating and helpful for you to hear. This is something that I've experienced my entire life, and it is not something that I understood until very recently. I have always had difficulties with physical issues. I have had a lot of physical sickness, illness, discomfort, XYZ throughout my entire life. Physically, I've always had things going on. And I may have chronic illnesses. I may have other things going on. So many people in my comments constantly tell me to get assessed for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, for mast cell activation syndrome, for a lot of different things. And so I'm well aware that there might be some other actual chronic illness going on at the same time. However, I do not yet know what that might be. What I can say is that I noticed that overstimulation specifically triggers a lot of physical illness for me, and I want to talk about that today and how it is a very real thing. Something that started very, very early on in my life is I've always had GI issues. I've always struggled with stomach aches. When I was younger, I used to get stomach aches all the time. When I was in school, I used to have to leave early all the time because I would get terrible stomach aches. I have been tested for allergies multiple times. I have had an ultrasound on my stomach. I have had a lot done because I have constantly, chronically in my life had stomach aches and complained about stomach aches and been literally disabled by how bad my stomach aches are. And what I realized looking back and now is that my stomach aches are almost always tied to sensory or social overstimulation. And I'm going to talk more in detail about that. So when I was very little, I was in a family dynamic where there was a lot of fighting going on, a lot of yelling, and high stress in my family. Whenever there was fighting, I would get stomach aches, and this happened all the time. I had stomach aches every single day. And the reason why I know that it was tied to the fighting is because it happened always when there was fighting, but also I know that it wasn't necessarily something that was actually tied to a chronic illness, and it was tied more to the mental stuff going on. It was tied to my sensory issues with hearing the loud yelling and the stress and all of that. I know it was tied to that because it went away whenever my sister, she's older than me, she used to do this trick where she would pretend that she was taking the stomach ache out of my stomach, and she would throw it out the window and get rid of it, and that would actually make it go away. So I know that it was connected to my mental state because she kind of mentally tricked me out of having the stomach ache. That was the first physical manifestation of my sensory issues as a kid, and that has persisted throughout my whole life. The other thing that I noticed is that looking back, when I was in school, I always got stomach aches when I went to a specific class. That class happened to be a class where the teacher would call on you if you didn't have your hand up. That was very anxiety inducing and also overstimulating to me because it made me feel mentally like I had to be on socially the entire time. It was very overstimulating and very overwhelming for me. I had to at any moment be prepared for a social interaction. And so I would get stomach aches every single day at that time, and I would always leave school at that time because I couldn't handle the sensory and the social overstimulation. The teacher himself also was very overstimulating. His personality was just really, really overwhelming to me, to the point of overstimulating me. And then later in life, when I started working, I would always get stomach aches after work. Every time I get home from work, I get a stomach ache and need to lay down for multiple hours. So you can see how my stomach aches, this physical manifestation, was connected to overstimulation for me. And this has always been a thing. So my GI symptoms, my stomach aches, are very, very tied to my sensory issues. And when I say sensory issues, I do lump social stuff into that because the social stuff is a sensory issue for me. It is overstimulating in the same way that like loud sounds are overstimulating to me. It's like my brain becomes overstimulated by social situations. My brain feels like it's running or like has to be so on in a specific way for social things. And so it is overstimulating to me in the same way that sensory experiences are overstimulating to me. So when I say like sensory overstimulation, I am going to be, for the purposes of this episode, I'm lumping social overstimulation in with that. Now, the other thing, I, throughout my entire life, get colds and get throat issues whenever I am socially overstimulated or when I am stressed. So whenever I have a lot of overstimulation happening in my environment, whenever I have high stress, high levels of just general overstimulation, let's say I'm moving apartments, let's say I am having a lot of social things all in the same week. I went on a travel group trip with a bunch of people at one point in my life, and this happened. Anytime I have an overload of sensory stuff going on, anything that is dysregulating to me or overstimulating to me for days in a row, I will get really bad throat infections. I have gotten to a point of almost needing my tonsils removed because they were so infected. I have had to go to emergency doctor's visits while visiting other countries because it happens every single time that I travel. I always get sick. And this sickness is very obviously, for me, tied to overstimulation and sensory overload. If I'm chronically overstimulated for days in a row, I will without a doubt get a throat infection. And it's just so interesting reflecting on this and realizing how my physical sickness and illness is really tied to my sensory issues and my overstimulation. And again, I don't know if there is some other chronic illness on top of all of this, but I do know that this is a connection that I experience in my life where my sensory difficulties, my overstimulation manifests very physically for me. In fact, I often notice the physical stuff before I even realize that I have been overstimulated. It is the physical manifestation that points it out to me. Because of this, I need a lot more rest than the average person. And when I say the average person, I'm talking usually about somebody who does not deal with chronic overstimulation. I spend like multiple hours every single day laying in bed because I'm trying to physically recuperate. Here is a really easy example. Yesterday, I went to a flea market by myself. I spent like 40 minutes there, but I did this alone. So that's already overstimulating for me, needing to navigate and do that alone. The social experience, the sensory experience, driving there alone, all of it, it's overwhelming. On top of that, I didn't time things very well, classic. And so while I was there, got really hungry, and I also really had to use the bathroom. Because I was alone, I had a difficult time navigating and finding a bathroom, and so I got overstimulated and couldn't find a bathroom. So I just went and drove home. It was a 30-minute drive. So I was driving now 30 minutes overstimulated because I really had to go to the bathroom. I was really, really hungry. And I also was really overheated. It was very hot yesterday. I spent 40 minutes at a flea market alone. This is now putting me in a position of having multiple needs through the roof. I really need to use the bathroom. I'm really hungry and I'm really overheated. And this is all because I just have a lot of difficulty doing things alone. As a disabled person, it's really hard for me to take care of all of my needs, to remember, and also to figure out how to fix things in the moment without it getting to an extreme point. And so it got to an extreme point yesterday. By the time that I got home, I was in a really, really bad place physically. I got to a point where I felt so ill that I could barely move. I just went into the bed and I had to just lay there before I could even get myself to stand up without feeling nauseous. And this happens to me all the time because of how often I get overstimulated and how impacting physically that overstimulation is on my body. Now, I know this is not something that all autistic people experience. Not all autistic people get overstimulated, and not all autistic people feel a physical manifestation of their overstimulation. This is something specific to me, but I do think that a lot of other autistic people relate, but not all of them, and I just want to make that clear. Because I don't want anyone to listen to this and feel like, oh, I don't experience that. Does that mean that I'm not autistic, or does that mean that I'm not valid? No, not at all. It does not mean that. And you are totally valid if you don't relate to this. But this is just something that I wanted to share because I just don't think enough people know or realize or talk about the fact that physical manifestations of overstimulation are very real, very impacting, and very disabling. And it is something that impacts me on a daily basis. And it is so tiring. It is so exhausting. And it is one of the biggest reasons why I have difficulties working in a traditional environment, like going into an office or spending multiple hours at a designated workplace, because I quite literally get to a point where I have to be laying down, or else I'm going to. I always don't want to say the word because I don't want to trigger anyone. Okay, I'm going to say the word, so maybe skip ahead if you know what I'm going to say and you don't want to hear it. But I get to a point of being so nauseous that I'm going to throw up, or I'm going to literally have an accident in my pants, if I don't get to a bathroom. My GI symptoms become so severe from my overstimulation that it gets to an extreme emergency point where I'm going to have a public accident if I cannot be somewhere private where I can regulate myself. And I think, again, this is something that people don't understand. When I say that I have a disability, being autistic disables me in this way because of how I experience overstimulation and how it physically manifests for me. People don't understand what that actually means and how that translates to things like working. I literally can't do it. When I was in school, I have thrown up in school so many times because of this. And like I said, I used to leave school early all the time because of this. This is a really disabling thing, and it is one of the biggest reasons why I cannot work a traditional job without having accommodations in place to figure and regulate myself. So basically, if you experience this too, you're not alone. And I find it so frustrating that people dismiss or just don't understand the magnitude of how disabling overstimulation is and how it physically manifests for some people, and how it truly impacts your ability to function. I just wanted to talk about that today. So thank you so much for listening. As always, remember, autistic adults exist. We deserve awareness, support, community, and acceptance, and I'm so grateful that you're here. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.